Lillard and CJ McCollum are no more. Anthony Simons is the new number 2, and Jerami Grant has been acquired. But is this team really any different than previous Dame-led teams? Portland started things off with the heavily rumored but nonetheless valuable addition of two-way wing Jerami Grant, and they got him at a very good price. Now sure, he is only a rental with only 1 year left on his contract, but for at least this season he provides the best wing play that Dame has arguably ever had. Jerami Grant had proven in his time in OKC and in Denver before his time in Detroit that he is the perfect role player to have at the 4 on a playoff team. He is a good defender and rebounder, shoots well from three-point range, specifically off the catch. He does the dirty work and makes those winning plays that you want from your two-way wing. The added bonus of having Jerami Grant now compared to his time in OKC and Denver is his improvement on offense, specifically with regards to his own shot creation. Jerami Grant has had much more offensive responsibility in Detroit, and in turn has significantly improved his offensive creation, specifically his shot creating and shot making from three-point range and from mid-range. As the number 3 option in the offense alongside Damian Lillard and Anthony Simons, he will have nowhere near the offensive responsibility he had in Detroit, but he can go back to being a mainly catch-and-shoot three-point shooter, focusing more on the defensive end and getting his offense at times, depending on who is on the floor and depending on matchups, but ultimately is more of a two-way wing who complements the team stars and likely returns to being a much more efficient shooter. With CJ McCollum out of town, the Blazers had to lock up Dame's new partner in the backcourt, and they did just that with Anthony Simons now earning $100 million over the next 4 years, which he certainly deserves after his breakout season. Now, as we will talk about later, there are certainly some concerns defensively with Simons, especially when paired alongside Damian Lillard, but there is no doubt that Anthony knows how to score. The exciting part of a Dame and Anthony Simons backcourt this season is that most of the breakout from Simons came while Dame was out of the lineup, and part of that while CJ McCollum was not on the court or not on the team, meaning Simons was commanding all of the opposing defensive attention and getting to shoot way less catch-and-shoot threes than he otherwise would be playing alongside Dame, and he's one of the best catch-and-shoot three-point shooters in the league. Not to mention the fact that Simons was taking some of the most difficult shots in the league due to all of this defensive attention and defensive pressure from opposing teams, and that is something he will certainly receive less of with Dame back in the lineup, meaning easier shots for Simons, and in turn, likely an increase in efficiency. At only 23 years of age and entering just his first season as a full-time starter, the ceiling is very high for Anthony, and even more of it will get to be realized alongside Damian Lillard this season. Jusuf Nurkic was brought back on a 4-year deal worth $70 million. And sure, Nurkic is a fine center, but man, would it have been nice to see someone different at center for Portland this year. And let me explain why. Nurkic is good, but he's not great, and he's not been able to reach the same level of play he showcased before his serious injury during the 2019-20 season. But regardless of that, what has always been the biggest problem for the Portland Trail Blazers, specifically during the Damian Lillard era, that's defense. And while Nurkic isn't a terrible defender, he certainly isn't some top-tier rim protector and paint presence. Especially when you have a backcourt of Dame and Anthony Simons, two very bad guard defenders, you need someone in the paint to clean up that mess, and Jusuf Nurkic just isn't that guy. Acquiring Miles Turner via trade is still a possibility before the trade deadline, which would help them significantly on both ends, specifically with their paint protection, as Miles Turner is one of the best shot blockers in the NBA. But for now, it appears as though Nurkic will again be the starting center for Portland, which is fine, but does still cause some defensive concerns considering the amount of dribble penetration that is going to be allowed by this backcourt. Now, you do have Jerami Grant, Gary Payton, and Josh Hart now in the wings, but thanks to the poor guard defense from Dame and Anthony Simons, you kind of need a very good presence in the middle to protect that paint, and the Trailblazers still don't have that. But despite those defensive concerns, Gary Payton was indeed added to help the defense of the Trailblazers. He's coming from the NBA champions on a 3-year deal worth $26 million and will help fill all of the defensive holes possible off of the bench. From point guards to center, he defends everyone and will likely be a key defender off of the bench for Portland to stop the perimeter penetration that leaks past guys like Dame and Simons. You know you're always going to get elite level effort and hustle from Gary Payton, and you can't have enough guys like that off of your bench, especially if you're a team like Portland that has historically struggled on defense. All of the moves up until now made some form of sense towards a win now mode around Dame, as he's now age 32, and you only have a few more years to build around him. You bring in Gary Payton, you re-sign Jusuf Nurkic, you lock up Anthony Simons, you acquire Jerami Grant, but the selection on draft night was puzzling. Shaden Sharp was selected with the 7th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft, which could be a great pick, but it doesn't really fit the win now mode timeline, as Shaden Sharp is arguably the most project heavy player in the lottery. He's coming off of a year where he didn't really play basketball. Now his athleticism is promising and his high school tape shows upside, but that's high school tape. And there's no doubt there is still some serious development physically and in terms of basketball skill before Sharp is a consistent, positive, key rotational piece. Now, long term, could he have the upside to be the pairing alongside Anthony Simons? Possibly, and maybe that's the thought process with the selection, but nonetheless, it certainly raised some eyebrows considering the win now direction of the Trailblazers. So the biggest and most important question is, after that offseason, are the Trailblazers better than they were before last year's trade deadline, and can they be better than the past Trailblazers rosters of the Damian Lillard era? Well, the Trailblazers might have the best team they've had in the Damian Lillard era, mainly due to their improvements on the wing and specifically their wing defense. Obviously, they still have the backcourt of Dame alongside a borderline all-star caliber player. It's just no longer CJ McCollum and is now Anthony Simons, but it's no doubt it's going to be one of the best backcourts in the NBA. With regards to their improvements of wing defense, Jerami Grant was previously talked about, and he might be the best wing that Dame has ever played with, and as a third option is fairly valuable. It's about as good of a third option as they've ever had in Portland outside of maybe Norman Powell on the offensive end, but obviously Jerami Grant is much better than Norm on the defensive end and is going to prove to be very valuable in Portland. Josh Hart was quietly a very valuable part of the return in the CJ McCollum trade. He's a great rebounder, a good defender, he works hard, he hustles, he gets loose balls. He is a winning play type player and shows very promising flashes on offense last year at the end of the year in Portland, something that, if can continue, provides some very good play at small forward in the starting lineup. Gary Payton, who was also previously mentioned, is going to be a very key piece of this bench, specifically on defense, and Desir Little still continues to improve, continues to show that he has some level of upside, and is a valuable wing defender off of the bench. But even though Portland are significantly better, the Western Conference is also much better than it pretty much ever has been. With that in mind, I don't think that we're going to see much better on-court performances, and most importantly, I still don't think that this Portland team is making much noise. In the postseason, where assuming everyone is healthy, the Trailblazers are quite possibly just a play-in team that fail to make the playoffs. Now, you may think that's a hot take, but it really isn't the fault of the Trailblazers, their team, or their roster construction. This is a good roster. It's more so a testament to how good the Western Conference currently is. The West has a Suns team that's coming off of a 64-win season that retained DeAndre Ayton, a Grizzlies team who are young and improving and coming off of a 56-win season, the Warriors, who are the defending NBA champions who have lost some depth but will be supplemented by some internal improvement and still have their core together, the Nuggets, who have the back-to-back MVP alongside the return of Jamal Murray and MPJ, the Clippers, who have Kawhi and PG-13 back in the court with arguably the best depth in the league, the Pelicans, who have Zion returning, a full season of CJ McCollum and alongside Brandon Ingram, the Mavericks, who added Christian Wood and JaVale McGee alongside Luka Doncic, and the Timberwolves, who have added Rudy Gobert and are set to have one of the best defenses in the league. And then that still leaves Portland, which makes for 9 very good teams in the West. And so as much as Portland might be good, at least one of these teams have to miss the playoffs, and 3 of them will have to be in the play-in tournament, which is wild because they are all deserving of the playoffs and can all compete in a 7-game series against each other. But one of them at least have to miss out on the playoffs. And I personally feel as though Portland is the weakest of these teams. The Trailblazers have done well from a roster construction standpoint. This is a good team, and one that should be in the thick of the competition next season in the Western Conference. But it's likely still not enough for the Blazers to get over the hump and get Damian Lillard in title contention.